Hello, everyone, and welcome to WHU Inside Business. Reporting to you from our virtual studio in San Francisco, California, I am Nicholas Peterson. And joining me today from Cologne in Germany, Dr. Oliver Mauss will be discussing GAIA-X and the future of European cloud computing. Dr. Oliver Mauss is the CEO at Plus Server, a German cloud computing software company, and is now sitting on the board of directors at GAIA-X. First of all, before we get into it, Dr. Oliver Mauss, welcome.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here. Pleasure.
Now, before we really get into it, can you give us a quick introduction to what is GAIA-X and how would you explain GAIA-X to your children?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, in very simple terms, GAIA-X basically is a group of companies that came together to ensure that cloud computing is safe and open, and to create some rules to how data is accessed, how services can be shared. And there's more and more companies joining this movement, so to say. And maybe one level deeper, it's meanwhile an association that has been founded that creates technical standards for cloud. It has 22 companies that have founded it initially, and about 300 companies that have joined as day one members and day two members. And it's standards that will be set for how data is accessed, how identities are managed and used and shared across different platforms. So that's one part. The other part is how services can be distributed onto different platforms, how those platforms and services can work together, how they can be transferred and ported from one platform to another. And then the third element is how infrastructure can be created in an independent and free way, free of control from any party. So those three elements are services that will be standardized, and also there will be code, open source code that will be developed, and that's the mission of GAIA-X.
And this aspect of reliance on open source code, what is the benefit to the economy for having this all be open sourced?
Yeah, the open source is basically a means to standardize and to open technology, and keep in mind most of the internet is built on open source. So what we do is focused on infrastructure, and infrastructure is from an economical perspective basically a lever to enable business. So, and there's certain standards that can be established in two ways. Either there's an industry, a company that goes forward and sets a kind of de facto standard. In software, for example, take Microsoft, that has set standards in the office space, certain standards for documents. But those are proprietary industry standards, or there are other standards that have been created by a community that are free and open to use for everyone, and actually also will be developed by community. So there's community contribution as well. And most of the internet, as I said, like Linux or the Apache server, are open source based and have created a wide economy. But in any case, it's very important for certain technology that it sets standards and that can be used by companies that build products upon them. And there's examples of standards that have enabled certain ecosystems, like for example in manufacturing, the DIN norm, for example, has made sure that components fit together and create sort of a product that is created out of multiple components. Or for example in telecommunications, the mobile industry was already existent in the 80s and 90s, but had different standards that weren't compatible. And then the GSM Association defined the global standard, and today's mobile communication bases on that standard. And roaming across the globe is today a given, but wasn't the case, when way back then when mobile was invented. So standards are important, and open source makes sure that the code, the software technology is accessible to anyone. And also the other good component of open source is it's fully transparent. So you know what it does. Everyone who has, of course, the expert knowledge can look up the code and can see what it does. So transparency, openness, and the community that develops it are very strong components. And specifically in the infrastructure space, it's a proven way of driving innovation.
Okay, and so currently the cloud computing environment is really dominated by some American cloud computing giants like Microsoft, Amazon Web Services, etc. And I wonder, so what is the main problem with the status quo here, and why is it dangerous for European firms to rely on overseas Chinese or American cloud computing companies?
Well, first of all, it's not a factor of overseas or not. Basically, sort of dependency on few dominating players is always a risk for competition. So it's a risk for a company, to be dependent on any kind of provider that no matter where the specific origin is. So in the first point, then second of all, it's keeping in mind that certain industries, more and more innovation is moving into software. And that means that a lot of the value creation is moving into software as well. And companies and industries that had nothing to do with software development in the past, today have become software companies or will become software companies more and more. So their innovation, value creation, and growth is highly dependent on software. And modern software development needs cloud infrastructure because certain methodologies like agile way of developing things, splitting up into multiple microservices, software controlling infrastructure, those are cloud native technologies, and that's modern way of programming. So it's very important that companies control their own innovation because of their growth future. And that dependency is not good. So those are elements in terms of being dependent on other providers, large dominating providers. In terms of geography, the cloud infrastructure has become a very important production source or source. It controls or dominates everyone's life. So, of course, also cloud technology has become a means to also create political influence. So, data has become very important. Controlling data streams, controlling technology. So the impact of legislation has become important as well. And of course, cloud technology that is in a different legislation than the company or the end consumer might impose certain risks. So. That is something where awareness is rising more and more, and of course has become a great deal of a part of the focus. So a lot of GAIA-X is about data sovereignty and data control as well. So that's a concern as well. And certain legislation, for example, in the U.S. The U.S. Cloud Act is an instrument that allows the U.S. government to access data. No matter where the data is stored, in which geography. So, and there is a certain conflict between that legislation and European legislation. So it does matter. So it's two things. It's dependency on players that have a certain dominance, first of all. And second of all, it's also making sure that data management is in line with legislation. And there may be conflicts between legislations, and that's something to be aware of as well.
No, I'm very glad you brought up this idea of data protection, because I mean the main difference, at least in my mind, is the fact that European companies, cloud companies, would be subject to the GDPR regulations of the EU, whereas American companies would not be. And quick question on the GDPR: in your view, has the GDPR been successful for Europe? With regard to its intended goals?
I think so. Yes, I'm very convinced it has. GDPR has introduced a high degree of awareness about handling data. And keep in mind, a lot of innovation happens in data-driven business models, data-driven services have become the norm, and data processing data, using data for decision making in an automated manner is a key area of innovation. And making sure this data is handled in a responsible manner has become more and more important, and many consumers aren't really aware. So GDPR has very strict regulations. So basically, it enforces companies to act very thoughtfully about how they process data, consumer data, personal data, and is taken very seriously by companies, because the impact of not following GDPR can be very severe, and as a consequence, consumers can rely on that their data is being used in a responsible manner and that they are in control. So it's very important that, and this comes back to our initial discussion about sovereignty, that every consumer is in control of his own data, because that data is a super important, valuable element in today's and tomorrow's society. So you need to know what happens to the data. You need to know that it doesn't go anywhere you don't want it to go. And you need to be sure that it's handled in a responsible manner. And GDPR puts standards to that, and has proven, not as a technical standard, but as a legal standard in a very good way. So I think this has worked out very well. Yes.
Okay, so the companies in Europe, you're saying, would prefer to use their cloud computing, or to prefer to have their cloud located in a country that is regulated by the GDPR, because in turn their customers will have the security and a better feeling about how their data is being used, and thus will increase their customer happiness. Is that?
Well, it depends. Not every data is critical. It depends. It's there's different kinds of data. Some data is quite critical. Some data actually is required to be handled in a much more cautious manner than others. And for that data, it's better to. Many companies decide to be more critical about that data and store and process that data in legislations and on technology that is more compliant. Other data, there's lots of data in the internet that is public and not sensitive. So, if you have a website or e-commerce, by definition, that everyone's supposed to see that. It's fully transparent and open. It's totally uncritical. But if it's, let's say, medical data, that leakage or transfer of that data to a source that is not entitled to have that data can be quite critical. So there's different sensitivities of data, and companies today have more awareness of that data is different, and more awareness about how to handle certain data, and consumers. The benefit is that consumers can rely on the companies adhering to those standards. Means that consumers more and more value that this is the case. And of course, that is a benefit to companies as well. So transparency and giving back control of data to consumers is in the end a benefit to consumers, and therefore also a benefit to companies. But as I said, not all data is sensitive. There's some data which is totally unsensitive.
Okay, I see, yeah. And the US cloud giants, for example, Amazon Web Services, Google, Microsoft, they're all showing interest in participating in GAIA-X. And I wonder what are their incentives to join, and what do you think about other US firms that are not regulated by GDPR right now joining the European GAIA-X platform?
Well, as I said, GAIA-X is a standard, and standards are open to anyone to join. It's good that the leading US cloud players are joining GAIA-X, because in the end that means we will create hopefully not only a European but a global standard. And as I said initially, GAIA-X is not a legal standard. GAIA-X is a technical standard. So in the end, what it does is it ensures that data is stored in a safe way, in an encrypted way. It ensures that access to data is given to those who are entitled to have that access. It ensures that identities are not only controlled, but also federated, so can be used across multiple platforms in a very secure and safe way. So the GAIA-X technology, or the GAIA-X standards, will ensure that across different cloud platforms, the technical means are there to ensure what is intended in terms of managing data in the right way. So it's actually good that the US cloud players are going to be part of GAIA-X, because in the end that means they commit to implementing those standards, and in the end everyone will benefit from that.
And how will GAIA-X, what are the means by which they will ensure that these companies will be implementing the technical standards as they were intended to be implemented?
Well, there's no, as with every standard, there's no way to enforce that. In the end, it's more a question of pull than a question of push. So, as every standard, it needs to sort of spread within a community. And in the end, if it's a standard that is supported by a large amount of players within the market, more and more will join. So there's no way to enforce that people join or companies join, but it's rather convincing by the value that it adds. And in the moment, I see a lot of players who are expressing criticism, and that's a fair criticism, because it's a huge challenge what GAIA-X has set out to do, and there's no proof that it's going to be successful, as with every challenge. And it's a complicated endeavor, and I accept that challenge. But I don't see many players who say it's not the right movement, it's not the right mission or vision. So, and that's very encouraging. So, as with every large, complex project, it needs to be managed in the right way. It needs to, be structured, organized, and executed in the right way. It's a matter of execution in the end, and that, like many large projects, is always a risk and a challenge.
Of course, of course. And if you don't mind me asking, what are the main points of criticism that you are observing?
Well, the main point, the criticism, the criticism we're facing are, for example, aren't players like Google or Amazon more advanced than what the European players are trying to do? Yeah, which is true, but as I said, it's proprietary standards rather than open standards. So we're standardizing what may already be existent in proprietary company standards. The criticism is, do we see enough results? Is it, is there too much administration? Is it too much complexity? That may be the case, but it's maybe a function of, large complicated products being in a setup phase, different companies, large companies having to organize and synchronize their interests. Yeah, that's also typical in this kind of organization. It's also a matter of, the criticism is, can GAIA-X prove? Is it real? Do we see real software and real implementations? Yep. Again, challenge taken, needs to happen this year. So we will see a number of implementations this year. By the way, PlusServer, the company that I work for, we'll launch a first GAIA-X compatible cloud this quarter. So we will see first implementations, but it's, there's been a lot of talking, a lot of hype, and now GAIA-X needs to demonstrate that it will deliver. And most of the criticism is around that.
Got it. Okay, I see. Well, I, can only, state how excited I am to see if this will work, and that it will potentially bring in European cloud computing technologies and companies up to a competitive level with these other giants that we've been discussing, and that it in turn helps the German Mittelstand, the rest of the European community, and the companies that really are now starting to rely on cloud computing software that whereas 10 years ago they had not.
Yeah, absolutely. And keep in mind, there's also a bit of a cultural difference between Europe and the US, and also, of course, Asia. But, I don't think from a cultural perspective, the Europe will be able to produce a winner takes it all kind of player, because Europeans don't take large bets like that. But if you look at Europe has an ecosystem of what we call the hidden champions, large mid-sized companies that are very good in certain areas of expertise. And basically that often has to do with standardization, because those, as I said initially, for example, in manufacturing, a lot of them have been based on using common standards. So Europe is good at, Europe is fragmented, is diverse, and that diversity and fragmentation, basically, if that's orchestrated by common standards, basically, the plan is to create an ecosystem of a number of players who are good in specific areas of cloud. But I don't think Europe would be able, and I don't think European companies would find the investments to build like global winner takes it all kind of players. It's not the European DNA, but Europe is quite good at setting standards and operating in ecosystems of let's say champions in their specific domains. And it's a different kind of approach.
And to further that comment, with Plus Server, what is your focus?
Our focus today is, or Plus Server's focus is, we provide and operate cloud infrastructure for sophisticated German Mittelstands players. We specifically support companies that go through a digital transformation in designing the cloud infrastructure that they need and operating that cloud infrastructure. Because as I said initially, it's software development has changed and also has a lot more challenges and a lot more requirements to the way cloud infrastructure is designed and used. And that requires specific expertise that we give to companies. We've been operating for about 20 years and have supported a lot of companies in the e-commerce and in the media space. But today, a lot of companies, for example, in manufacturing, are moving into digitization because data-driven technologies like machine learning or AI are playing a large role in manufacturing today. And these companies don't have the expertise to develop and design and operate cloud services. And that's what we do for them, as a service. So we support that area of growth.
And to end, to kind of wrap it up with a question that I hate that I have to ask, but I feel like I really would like to know, is the coronavirus, as if we haven't talked about it enough. How has the coronavirus and the COVID pandemic either, accelerated or decelerated the goals of GAIA-X? How has it affected this?
Yeah, it's accelerated it actually. And keep in mind that probably Germany is somewhat behind sort of the digitization curve of some other countries. And, Germany has learned that homeschooling, working from home is actually feasible in large scales. That has, on the other hand, driven the need for platforms that support collaboration, platforms that support exchange of documents and communication. So Europe, I can talk for Germany and Europe, have perceived a push in digitization, and basically that has meant that the need and the demand for cloud services has increased. And of course, as I said, some of the data is more sensitive. Some of the technology is provided by players within Europe that are maybe sensitive towards being dependent on global technology players. So that has given GAIA-X a push, which is one of the few positive side effects of the corona pandemic.
Well, Dr. Oliver Mauss, thank you so much for giving us a few insights about the future of European cloud computing. And I appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
And from all of us here at WHU Inside Business, to our listeners and viewers out there, thank you. And we'll see you next time.